for Arisa Health, and that Arisa Health is the Arkansas's largest behavioral health care provider. Brad Hyde has 27 years in the mental health care arena, has worked in Arkansas, Tennessee, Mississippi, Missouri, and has been a speaker to groups in 3 continents: North America, Europe, and Africa. And he's flown in just for us. Brad, take it away.
Well, thank you. Every time someone says that whole list, it sounds like I can't keep a job, but I assure you I can when they list all the places. But what I've been asked to talk about is sort of one of the things is dealing with the disagreeables in our life. And so, it can be individuals, it can be companies, it can be your Zoom that you can't get your mute off, whatever it may be. What I want to talk to you today is one, is about interpersonal relationships, how to deal with them, how to make them more effective, how to make them more pleasant. Because really what it comes down to in this whole situation is how you deal with it. I was talking the other day, and we were talking about stress, and stress is not a bad thing. People say there's good stress and bad stress. It really isn't. Stress, everybody's got stress. It's how you deal with that stress is really what comes down to whether it's positive or negative. And the same thing is true with our interactions with people. Human beings are pack animals. We need other people because no one today made all their clothes. No one today grew the food they've eaten. So we need other people. And so how we deal with those is really is how we will deal with the day. So let's talk about, I'm going to say something very controversial that everybody goes, when they're in the room when I say this, but really what it comes down to is if you're having a negative interaction with somebody, whether it's you've got a bad coworker, whether you've got a rude boss, whether you've got a disagreeable spouse, what almost all the time it comes down to is it's your fault. Now, the word fault is what really bothers people because it denotes blame, but I'm not really blaming. I'm saying when I say it's your fault, it's that you can affect it. You can change it. Because here's the thing. We can't change other people. Now, I'll say this. The men on the Zoom call, they understand that. We understand we can't. The women, on the other hand, y'all have a different perception. You all have a great positive way of thinking that you can change the man in your life. I love it when I interact with people and talking to some lady and she said, well, I loved him, but he changed. And when I talk to the man, it's like he's changed to all the things she wanted him to change. And then she's like, he's not the man that I married. And so it's how that happens. I'm being stereotypical just to make a point, but we do that sometimes, don't we? We get people and we want them to do this, this, and this, and then they change, and we're like, well, you're not the person I met. You're not the person I know. So what I'm getting around to is that your interaction with other people, whether positive or negative, has almost everything to do with you and very little to do with them. So if you're having a negative, if you have a disagreeable person in your future or in your present or in your past, whatever it may be, what I want you to start focusing on is not that person, not understand if they were nicer, if they listened more, if they were more pleasant. I want you to start thinking about what you can do to affect this situation, how you can influence yourself by changing, by what you yourself can do can change that other person to be more effective. So to give an example, I'm a single father of 2 children, and if anybody's taught me how to deal with disagreeable people, it's being the parent of 2 teenagers. And so I mean, I often say that working in the mental health field is really what prepared me to take care of 2 teenagers. And that, listen, I can be a disagreeable, they can be disagreeable, but I've learned that how I interact with them is the best way to affect how they interact with me. And so we can influence people. And when I'm having a argument, or if I'm having a negative interaction with someone, particularly them, I first analyze what I want from this. So when I'm going into a situation, let's say that you have a disagreeable boss. And that's a very unique situation because, there's certain things you can't say to them. You'll say it back in your office with the door closed, whatever it may be. You're chatting about it with your other coworkers. But when you're with your boss, you've got to be a certain way. So when you enter into that situation, what I want you to do is I want you to analyze and think about what you want to achieve when you're interacting with that person. Because a lot of us say that, we do something and they say, well, I didn't have a choice. And here's the thing. When you say I didn't have a choice, that's really a child's excuse. Adults always have choices. It might not be choices we like. It might not result in something that we're happy about, but it still comes down to a choice. And why I point that out to you is because it gives you some ownership and control. I mean, I used to say the only 2 things that you can't choose are being born and dying, but I've worked too long in mental health and seeing too many people who have chosen when they die. So really, the only choice in your life is being born. That's it. Everything else is a choice. What you do, where you go, what you eat, all those things, they might not be great choices. You might not like to have made that choice, but it still is a choice. And I point that out because when you are interacting with people, everything about that is a choice. How you talk to them, how you respond to them. If you're dealing with a disagreeable person, is what you're about to say going to make this situation better? Or is what you're about to say going to perpetuate this situation? One of the best pieces of advice that I've ever been given is that you cannot be rational with an irrational person. And so what that means is that if you're in an argument, and let me say this, my dad, who is a fantastic dad, I love him. He's a wonderful dad, but if he doesn't remember his Facebook password, it's going to probably end our relationship, because that is one of the most stressful. I mean, my dad interacting with modern technology has been one of the most disagreeable situations. I'll give an example. My dad was trying to remember his password, and so I said to my dad, which I learned, I said, Dad, how about writing a sentence? For instance, I said, you could write a sentence that says, I have 2 grandchildren, period. It's got a capital, it's got a number, so it's really a very, it made sense to me. It's a very easy thing to remember. So a few weeks later, my dad says, well, I need to change my password. Something's happening. I said, okay. So we sit down with his computer and I said, all right, I'm sitting at the computer and I'm going to type it in. I said, okay, Dad, tell me your password. Tell me your password that we can change it. And he said, oh, okay. Are you ready? Now, first of all, that's a warning sign for me. If he says, are you ready for me to type in the password, I'm already concerned. So then I said, and he said, okay, here it is. And he goes, Tammy Wynette and George Jones were playing at the Grand Ole Opry in 1969 singing Stand By Your Man. I go, that is the password? Because I looked and there were like 75 little dots on the screen. And I go, he goes, you told me to write a sentence. I said, I didn't say write a book. I said, just write a sentence. And so I'm typing this in. I go, that's not right. And he goes, well, I'm not sure how to spell Wynette. So I'm like, oh my gosh. So I have tried, because my dad is one of those, is that if he doesn't want to do it, he wants to make the situation so frustrating for you that you just say, I'll do it. Stop, I'll do it. But I've learned that that's not the greatest thing. I want him to learn. I want him to do this because I want him to be able to do it on his own. And so there are times where I get in this situation where it's disagreeable to me, but I have to decide to myself, is it worth the extra effort to encourage him to learn this, or is this situation where I need to just do it and move on? And we have those situations all the time. We have those situations where, I know this. There are many times where I'm halfway through an argument with somebody and I realize that I am completely wrong and they're completely right, but I still continue the argument because I don't want them to know that I figured out I was wrong and they were right. I've done that. I'll admit that. I say, and we all, that. You, especially if you're married or have a significant other, you're arguing with them halfway through, you're like, oh my God, they're right. But you're like, I'm going to keep going. I'm fully in.
Do what?
And so that's what happens with, particularly with my children. I'll give you another story. My son, when my children were very young, when my son was about 8 years old and his sister was 4 years old, we were in the house and we sort of have a rule that if they have an argument, they need to settle it themselves. I wanted to empower them and teach them to conflict resolute themselves. But because I said, if I have to get involved, neither one of you are going to like the results. So when my son was 8 and my daughter was 4, my daughter was playing with one of his toys. And he walked across the room and he snatched the toy out of her hand. And she didn't say anything. She just stood there for a minute. Now, I was observing this and I just reflexively said, uh-oh. And my son goes, what? And I go, well, what little I know about women is that if you do something to them and they don't immediately respond, something gonna happen later. So I said, look, if you need to go to the hospital, I'm happy to drive you, but I'm just saying something gonna happen. He goes, what can she do to me? She's just a little girl. And I go, look, I'm just this is experience. I'm just warning you. I feel I've done my duty as a parent. I've done my due diligence. So there you go. So that day it had been raining pretty hard, and finally the rain stopped and we went out. We have a front porch and it's a pretty high front porch. And we walked out because the rain had stopped and the sunshine had come out. We walked to the edge of the porch. My son is standing at the edge of the porch and he looks down and there's some bugs crawling and he leans over the edge and his sister is standing behind him and she takes one finger and she just pushes him over the side of the porch. And I watched that and he falls the good 3 feet to the ground and he's just kind of laying there. And I go, her name's Scout. I go, Scout, you just pushed him. She goes, no, he fell. And I go, I really thought I saw. She goes, no. And he's laying on the ground. He goes, what happened? She goes, you fell. And so he gets up and he's picking the gravel out of his face. And he looks at me and he goes, well, she pushed me. Is she? I said, she says you fell. And he goes, was she in trouble? And I said, look, I warned you about this earlier. I told you that I'm just proud this is all that happened. And so to this day, she insists that he fell. But what it comes down to in that situation, when it comes down to any time we're interacting with someone, whether it's negative, whether it's not optimal for you, what I want you to first analyze is, what am I doing in this situation that's making it negative, that's not making it productive? Now, I am not talking, let me stress this, I'm not talking about abusive relationships. I'm not talking about necessarily those, whether they're physical or emotional, although I will say there are choices. There are hard choices in those situations. They're very difficult choices. I'm not judging you for your choices. But I'm saying that when you have an interaction with someone else, if you sit there and analyze it, you will see situations that you could have made it better. For instance, when I got divorced, I thought that it was 90% her fault with a 10% margin of error. I thought that's what it was. I have slowly learned over the years, it's more 60-40. She's still the 60. But I recognize in that situation that there were things that I could do better, that I could interact better. And so what I want to stress to you all is that when you're in a situation, when you're interacting with other people, I want you to analyze your part in this conversation, in this relationship. What have you done to get it to this situation? When you recognize that, when you analyze that, I think you're going to see ways to make it better, to make it improve. And look, you've got to be honest with yourself and other people. You've got to say in the situation, this is not working for me. For instance, there are many times, you've done this, and this is a simple example of what we do. I'm going to give you two examples, really, and then I'll wrap up. But one is that, have you ever reached for someone's hand to shake their hand before COVID, of course? So I might need to change this analogy in the future, but you reach to shake someone's hand and you get that, you get that awkward, you grabbed some fingers, you grabbed a thumb wrong, it's terrible, it's awkward, and then you just kind of do it and you walk off. What I do is, if that happens, I go, stop, wait, we got to go back in. We got to go back in, because I recognize that situation didn't work. A lot of times we just let it go. We just move on. But it's some of those little things. It's some of those things we don't recognize. I'll give you another quick example. I think I even spoke about this at our last in-person talk shop. So let's say this, ladies, if you've ever gotten on an elevator or walked down some stairs and something made you uncomfortable. 70% of human interaction is nonverbal. We see things, we recognize things, we subconsciously note things, and it changes how we interact with people. And so sometimes when you're in that situation, if you get on an elevator, and I have so many ladies that I talk about with security and things like that, they say, well, we were on the elevator and I felt comfortable, but I didn't want to get off the elevator because I didn't want to embarrass myself, or I didn't want to embarrass someone else. And I say, well, is embarrassment better than harm? And that's a very drastic example, but there are so many times where we're interacting with someone and we see all these signs that we just ignore. They're not making eye contact. They're not listening. Listen, when someone is not interested in what I'm saying, it has everything to do with me and nothing to do with them, because I'm the presenter. I'm the one giving the information. I need to change the situation. I need to do that. If my children, we have a rule at my house. It's not a steadfast rule, but when we're talking, you cannot be looking at another screen. You cannot be doing your phone. But here's the thing. The rule applies to me as much as it applies to them. And the same thing's true. I have so many bosses who say, my employees are not very respectful. And when we analyze this situation, we've learned that the boss is not particularly respectful to their employees. So when you're in that situation, when you're interacting with someone that you feel is disagreeable, I want you to stop. I want you to analyze everything that you had, that you contributed to that situation, that you responded. Did you make a choice not to point out what was wrong? If someone was rude to you and you chose not to point out they're being rude to you, is it really their fault they continue to be rude to you? Because here's what happens. Sometimes people don't recognize. Sometimes people say something they didn't. Look, I have a reputation of being a smart aleck. And so I don't need an amen from Mary Lou, so I'm glad she's muted. But sometimes I say things that aren't smart aleck, that are interpreted as smart aleck, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating for me, but I recognize that it's not fair for that person who, if I'm 9 times out of 10 a smart aleck, the 10th time they don't get that I'm not a smart aleck. That's all about me and really nothing about them. And so when you have that relationship, when you have that situation with someone else and it's disagreeable, I want you to stop. I want you to evaluate your contribution to this. I want you to say, how are they perceiving me? Take a moment to see it from their perspective, because we rarely understand someone else's perspective when we're entering into a conversation. We think, how many times are you just waiting for them to stop talking so you can say your point? You didn't listen to anything they said. It's just I can't wait, please inhale, because I'm going to tell you how completely wrong you are about everything you just said, even though I don't really remember what you said. So I'm going to do that. I'll wrap up with this about perspective. My daughter, when we go to church, when my daughter was much younger and we would stand up to sing a song, I would pick her up and she would stand on the back of the pew in front of us so she could see and all that. And as she got older, I felt she was getting too old to be picked up and to stand on the back to see everybody. So one time we were at church, she had gotten older. I felt like, okay, we stood up. She said, will you lift me up and let me see? And I said, don't you think you're too old to be lifted up? And she said, well, maybe, but all I see down here is butts. And so I didn't think of her perspective. It didn't even dawn on me. All I thought about was what everybody else would think, what I thought she's getting too old, and I immediately lifted her up because it changed when I understood her perspective. Sometimes we're interacting with somebody, we don't know that they have health issues. We don't know if they have family issues. We don't know if they have financial issues. Sometimes someone's disagreeable, not because they're a disagreeable person, but because they are stressed, because they're upset, because they're unhappy, because you're being a jerk, because they've had a bad hair day or whatever it may be. Fix your hair. It looks good, Mary Lou. But what it is that I want everyone, we sort of abdicate personal responsibility when we have a disagreeable situation. And I want to point out to you that when someone is not nice to you, you have almost as much responsibility for that as the person who's not being nice to you. And so I want you to analyze that, because here's the end goal. The end goal is, and you can decide this, I began this with talking about choices. If you choose to continue to contribute negatively to a bad situation, that's your choice. You get to do that. You don't get to gripe about it being a bad situation, because it's your fault. It's now your fault. I've empowered you. And I've said, here's what you need to analyze. If that continues, that's fine. That's your choice. I told you, you had your choice. But if you want to have a different interaction, if you want it to be more pleasant, and this is it. I know I've said 3 times I'm wrapping up, but I remember this story. Long ago, I worked with a lady who was probably the meanest, nastiest, rudest person I had ever worked with. And I'll admit this, she didn't like people, and people didn't like her. And so I would see her in the morning in the hallway, and I would say to her, "Good morning, Stacy." And she would just walk past. Now, I'll admit to you all now, I would often say, "Good morning, Stacy," with a happy, cheerful voice, just to annoy her. I'm going to admit that right now. I would just be like, "Yeah, I'm going to say nice things to you just for spite." So eventually I said, "Good morning." And she goes, "Why do you say good morning to me every morning? I don't want to talk to you." And so then I was like, "Oh, okay, that's how it is. Well, here we go." So then I was even more happy the next time. And she says, "Do you think we're friends?" And I said, "Not yet." She goes, "We'll never be friends." And then I said, "Well, you don't get to choose my friends. I choose my friends." And so over the next year, I was in for the long haul, guys. And for the next year, I was as nice and chipper and sweet to her. Part of it was true. Part of it was not, just for me digging in that little. But let me say this. After a year, the facade started to crack. I wore her down. And finally, we were talking, and she says, why do you want to talk to me? And I said, "Because I don't want someone else to choose who my friends are. And I've decided, for better or for worse, I'm going to be your friend." And let me admit to you all people now, she has since passed away, but she was eventually one of the sweetest, nicest, dearest people that has ever existed in my life. And what I learned is that she had almost debilitating self-esteem issues. And she was so hateful and nasty to people because she knew why they didn't like her, because she treated them badly. She didn't have to wonder if anybody didn't like her for this reason or that. She knew she was mean, she was rude. That's therefore why they didn't like her. But I changed her perspective, and I talked to her, and I met with her, and I had other people say, "Why are you being friends with Stacy? She's the meanest person we ever met." And we interacted, and it touches me now because I'm sad that she's gone, but she was so very dear to me, so very sweet. She was one of those people that would do anything for you, and she would do it with her whole heart. And I learned, I felt like, because I'm a spiritual person, I felt like God sort of said, you're gonna like this person. It's going to benefit you just as much as it's going to benefit her. And I'll say this, she got more friends because I chose that. But I will say this, is that I benefited so much more than she ever benefited with, because she was such a wonderful, wonderful person. And I wrap that up by saying to you, you would be amazed if you changed how you interacted with people, what you can gain from it. There are people out there that you might think are terrible, nasty, horrible people. And I'm glad Lynn Doyle's not on this, because I would point her out. But no, I'm just joking. But I'm saying that there are people out there that you would be amazed that they will change your life, that you never thought that person would change your life. And it has everything to do with you and very little to do with them. So thank you so much I hope I've given you some tips. I hope I've given you some things that you can take away. If right now, Joe, if anybody has any questions, if they have a situation that they want to talk about that we can quickly address, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, just unmute yourself and hear from
So can so last night I came home and I said to my husband, I played tennis tonight, which I just started doing again after 7 years. So I have a lot to learn. But anyway, I came home and I said, I don't think this girl likes me. She kept on hitting the ball like at me. She clearly was head and shoulders, more talented than me. And she's lobbing things to everyone else, but me, she's just like beating the ball. Literally, I have a welt on my thigh from one of the balls that she hit with. And that was my thought process, is like, she doesn't like me. Then I realized that I was trying to win against this person. So she was just playing hard back. She was just reacting. It wasn't obvious to me at first. I thought she just didn't like me for some reason. But then I realized I was trying to keep the ball away from her and hit it where she couldn't get to it. So of course she was going to step up her game. But I just think that was a aha moment for me to realize this has nothing to do with liking me. She's just, like you said, Brad, responding to what I was doing.
Yeah. What I want you to take away from this, everyone, is that if you're interacting with somebody, imagine there is a mirror in between the two of you. Because a lot of times people are just reflecting back what you're giving them. Mm-hmm. So if someone, unless they have a resting cranky face, a lot of times what someone is simply reflecting back. And then not to point out, this is, of course, not to address Mary Lou, but we are self-centered and think it's all about us and nothing about them. And when it comes down to, it just could be a bad day for them. It could just be an interaction, and it changes your perspective. Just like Mary Lou said, I think your tennis partner recognized that you were trying to win. Probably also recognized that you may have had more skills than the other people, and so approached you differently.
Yeah.
Personally, when you tell that story, I look at it as, Mary Lou, you're better at tennis than you thought you were, and the instructor said, all right, now we're up in this game.
Yeah.
And that's a compliment. That's a great thing right there.
I don't know it.
Thank y'all so much. We're going to attempt to upload Brad's presentation today onto Talk Shop's Facebook page. So if you haven't liked us, hello, Miranda. If you haven't